This is Pichu. Pichu is always seen as a joke character in competitive and casual Melee. In Smash 64, Jigglypuff was given the joke character spot in Smash, but obviously Jigglypuff is the opposite of a joke character in Melee. Pichu is one of the only characters in the game who damages himself and will gain percent for using any moves that deal electric damage. Pichu as a whole is outclassed by Pikachu, meaning that the character is just really bad. Especially when Pikachu is at the top half of the tier list and Pichu has been consistently at the bottom half of the bottom 5 characters that are in Melee. Many people have tried to experiment with the character and bring Pichu to top level play, and don't get me wrong, this experimentation with Pichu has allowed a lot of people to realize that Pichu isn't nearly as bad as people thought, but Pichu is still obviously a bottom 5 character. And that was clearly why he was just always made to be bad in Melee. But again, before anyone says anything, oh my god, Pichu's nair is so good, Pichu isn't that bad, hold up. Pichu is a nimble but light character, yet also being a very, very fragile character. Pichu has quick aerials, and some of them being pretty decent in power. Nair being Pichu's most well-known and powerful aerial. Neutral air is the central tool in Pichu's moveset because it racks up damage really easily and does solid knockback. It leads into his other aerials in his kit, like his up air, his down air. Pichu's smash attacks have a decent amount of KO power to them, and he has decent throws in his kit as well. However, Pichu has a huge amount of weaknesses that keep him from being in the meta. Reason 1 is Pichu is extremely light. Being an extremely light character in Smash means you tend to be KO'd very early. This is a combination of Pichu's literal moveset that can also do damage to himself, which means Pichu is gonna get KO'd even earlier than most characters. Pichu can get KO'd early by really simple combo flows, which is a really bad thing in Melee. It tends to mean that you have to make less mistakes and the character all around is more of a risk to use. The way to offset a light character is potentially giving them a lot of KO power in order to balance the archetype. Pichu, however, is a really weak character and only has a handful of decent moves in his moveset. Pichu's nair is actually a pretty solid move, but his nair isn't enough to make him into a competitively viable character in the meta. Because Pichu is such a light character, this affects how he deals with hit stun, meaning he'll be in more hit stun when he gets damaged because Pichu being one of the lightest characters in the game. This really sucks because Pichu is just all around pretty average in power, and it's not like Pichu's large negatives of being extremely light are being weighed out by his maybe potential KO power, but the fact is Pichu is not like Jigglypuff. This is really only the beginning of the list of Pichu's major flaws. Reason 2 being a majority of Pichu's attacks damaging himself, which I mentioned earlier. This is the main design quirk behind Pichu, and it's made to reference the Pokemon anime, but however in Smash Bros. It really just makes Pichu into a really bad character. Any move that does electricity damage will cause Pichu to gain percent and damage himself. Yes, that means his own up special recovery move damages Pichu. 9 of the moves in his moveset causes self-damage, those being a handful of his aerials, smash attacks, and special moves. Even his grab pummel of all things does self-damage to Pichu. This changed the strategy behind the character, where most of the time people will try to avoid these moves in general. Randomly throwing out moves and not even hitting your opponent is almost not even worth it because you're gaining percent and self-damaging yourself, and it really can mean you could die early for it. People who play Pichu will tend to go for safer options. The handful of Pichu players that are out there, I guess I should say, they stay away from the more committal options that do self-damage, and it's not like there's a huge benefit to using these self-damaging moves. I mean, there really isn't. A lot of these moves are weaker than Pikachu's and have poor range, meaning that a large part of Pichu's moveset is just not good in general, which goes into reason 3, Pichu's lack of range. This is a reoccurring issue of the low tiers of Melee. The fact that Pichu is a clone of Pikachu who already has pretty poor range, Pichu having a smaller character model, which means he has slightly worse range in most of his attacks. But okay, let's be real. If you look at the matchup spread, how is Pichu going to beat Marth or Sheik? The list goes on. Oh, but honest content, my Pichu is good on net play, I beat all the Sheiks. Who are you trying to fool? No, really though, do people go to top 8 with Pichu alone, let alone top 64 in a major tournament? Go to the comments and let me know any solo Pichu mains out there that are going to top 8s with Pichu. Let me know. Pichu has the worst matchup spread in the entire game. Worse than Bowser. Listen, if you're going to learn anything from this video, it's that tier lists don't lie. Quote that, put it on your bed frame wall. Tier lists don't lie by honest content, because it's true. Getting back on track though, Pichu having really poor range means he's going to have trouble approaching, grabbing, comboing. Overall, it's one of the worst negatives to have in Melee, especially at a top level. And yes, Pikachu does have worse grab range than Pichu, ironically, which is the one weird benefit that Pichu has over Pikachu, but it's still pretty bad. It's not gonna help the character at all. This goes to my next and final point. This is where I compare a high tier character to a low tier character, and what better character to choose than Pikachu himself. Pichu not only performs significantly worse than Pikachu, he's considered a low tier character and sometimes even referred to as a joke character. Pichu inherits Pikachu's range issues, but having very few positive traits to compensate for such problems. Pikachu is going to outclass Pichu by a long shot. The raw power increase on a few of the finishers is not enough to outweigh the fact that overall Pikachu has more power, more utility. Pikachu is just overall a way better character. Pichu may have a couple positives that outshine Pikachu, like for example his Nair and a few of his smash attacks, but the raw power increase on a few of his finishers doesn't outweigh the fact that Pichu is hurting himself on a majority of his moves, and it's just making him a much riskier character compared to Pikachu. Perhaps the single most negatively impactful thing that Pichu has is the lack of the semi-spike hitbox on Pichu's up air, which is something that Pikachu has, and it makes him vastly better at edge guarding. It's such an integral part of Pikachu's moveset that the fact Pichu doesn't have it means he's going to be really bad at edge guarding off stage. It's one of Pikachu's biggest strengths and one of the main reasons that he can stand up with the Melee top tiers at the highest level of play. Pichu has a few positives like being able to wall jump, which can aid in Pichu's recovery, but again, this really isn't going to help him only on a handful of stages that are in the game. To show how light Pichu is compared to Pikachu, this is how stark of a difference their weight is. Pichu has a couple of small differences that make him have a slight edge in some areas. Pichu has a larger shield for his character model, a decent grab, and a Nair that is better than Pikachu's, but it isn't enough to make him better than Pikachu. Pichu's flaws heavily outweigh the character. The final reason being, alright, Pichu was made to be a bad character, let's be real. Looking at all the negatives, it's clear that Sakurai himself made Pichu as a joke character. He is definitely fulfilling that niche. Think of like Dan from Street Fighter, that's Pichu in Melee. The self-damage on a majority of Pichu's moves in combination with other negatives in his kit, it's pretty obvious to tell that Pichu is not a good character. And if Mewtwo King himself couldn't save the character from competitive obscurity, then I'm sorry Pichu, you've earned your placement in the meta.
But yeah, overall this character's really bad, you just use him to embarrass people.
Now Pichu onward. Pichu in Smash Ultimate. So normally I would cover a character and how they transitioned to Melee, Brawl, to Project M. Pichu isn't in either of those games. Pichu wouldn't return to an official Smash Bros. Game until 2018 Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, where, my god, he's a buffed character. Initially, in the very first updates of the game, Pichu ironically became one of the best characters in the game. What? And yes, the literal joke character in Melee became one of the best characters in the entire meta. Pichu finally became a top tier, who would have thought? So, where do we begin? Pichu's self-damage gimmick has been significantly turned down, being much less of a negative for the character, and Pichu's speed overall has been massively buffed. His buffs to his airspeed and acceleration, walk speed, dash speed, also earning a benefit of being able to crawl, which can allow Pichu to escape combos and extend combos of his own and start setups, adding to his agile playstyle. Pichu had slight buffs to his weight, still being the lightest character in the game, but this will allow Pichu to survive a little bit longer, and Pichu's previously strong smash attacks and Nair and Melee have been nerfed, but this still is offset by Pichu's just much stronger combo game in Smash Ultimate. Pichu was made to be a fast-falling character, and this can help benefit his speedy combo flows, his up-tilt strings. His forward air is much stronger now. All the hits on the move link together more consistently, and they're just way better than what they were in Melee. His back air and forward tilt and down B were made into really strong KO moves, and Pichu is going to benefit a little bit more from Smash Ultimate's rage mechanic that allows fighters to do more knockback when they have higher percentages. And because Pichu does self-damage to himself, the ability to allow him to potentially build up rage quicker than other fighters is kind of a benefit to the character now. Pichu was effectively moved from being a joke character to being made into a glass cannon. Pichu is now a very strong character that can be KO'd easily. Pichu's combo flows and agility were really strong in the early days of the Smash Ultimate meta, making Pichu one of the best characters in the game, surprisingly. This resulted in back and forth updates with buffs and nerfs to try to attempt to balance Pichu out. Pichu was given a larger hurt box because many of the characters in the game straight up couldn't touch Pichu, and he was just way too small compared to the rest of the cast. They would later increase the recoil on a handful of his electric attacks, more end lag on also some of Pichu's stronger attacks, and then give Pichu small buffs to try to offset the nerfs that they gave him in previous patches. Also, they would change his shield size as well. The recoil nerfs were later removed, which is kind of funny. It's kind of like they knew that they over-nerfed the character. But for a moment, Pichu was seen as one of the best characters in the game. But as the balance patches went by, Pichu would lose its top placement in the meta, and now is still seen, but not nearly as big as the character was initially when the game first came out. Pichu is most likely a mid to high tier character, which is still solid for the once joke character in Super Smash Bros. Melee. Alright you guys, thank you guys for watching the video. If you guys want more videos, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to get content early and be a part of the Discord community, there's a Patreon down below. Shout out to my patrons. I hope you guys enjoy the video. You guys have a good one, and take care.